There! The sun peeked up over the horizon, and I'd never been as happy to see the light of day as I was now. I waited another hour and a half until the sun was well in the sky, and things were starting to heat up before I dared make a move. I picked up my things and got the hell out of there, shuddering as I passed the remnants of the coyote, just a bloody patch of gray fur and shattered bones. I jogged the whole time, never pausing, never stopping, and never looking behind me. Every time I slowed, I'd hear the wind whistle again, and I'd catch a whiff of something foul, so I'd pick up the pace again. Hours later, I was just about ready to drop when... There! The start of the trail. I could see down to the car park. Without stopping my jog, I reached back and pulled my backpack off, holding it in one hand and awkwardly cradling the gun case in my other arm as I scrubbed the dark pack from my car keys. I almost tripped as the hard trail gave way to the gravel of the car park, but managed to keep my footing as I scrambled towards the car. I fumbled with the keys for what seemed like an age, before throwing open the door, tossing my things across, and slinging myself into the driver's seat, both hands gripping the wheel with a white-knuckled grip. I look at myself in the rearview mirror, and it was taken aback at the haggard, wild-eyed figure that stared back at me. There were rivers of clear skin in the dust caking my face. I realized I'd been sobbing with relief since I'd been able to see the end of the trail. I looked back out where the trail started, and saw the dust from the path swirl as the wind picked up once more. I hurried, ramming the keys into the ignition. I gunned the engine, throwing the car into gear, pulling around and quickly peeling out of the road. As I sped back towards the city, it wasn't until I hit the main highway before my heart stopped pounding and my breathing slowed to normal levels. A few hours later, less time than it took to drive out there, I was not doing the speed limits. I was home, with my doors locked and the sunlight streaming in through the windows. My phone turned on after I'd plugged it in. Now you work. So I messaged my sister so she wouldn't call search and rescue. A day or so later, I called the park service and told them that I'd been stalked by some mountain lions on the trail, and they removed the area from the information section of their websites. Nobody really went there anyway, they said. I didn't mention the abandoned car or the bloody boots, and I didn't tell anyone what had really happened, and after all, who would have believed me if I did? There was no point in sending anyone else into danger. Later, I started reading up on some local folklore, but stopped pretty quickly. I came across something that made me start to shake at the description of it. I'm fairly certain I now know what the thing was, but I decided I wouldn't look any more into it, and I just tried to put it all out of my head. It hadn't really worked. My breath catches in my throat every time I go into a dark room and fumble around for a light switch. I don't hike much anymore. If I do go hiking, then it's strictly along well-used trails, and I never, ever do an overnighter. I had work transfer me to a branch with a long way from the deserts. I couldn't deal with the feeling of hot wind anymore. I'm somewhere where it snows now. My encounter left me with a lot of unanswered questions, but one question ranks above the rest, and it's something that I'm not really sure I want to know the answer to. If that thing I read about is real, then what else is real and hiding out there in the ends? I hope you all enjoyed that story I shared with you, and I hope it was able to relax you. But if you are still awake, I have another story for you, and this one is called Cold as Ice. Jim Sterling was not having a good night. For reasons he couldn't begin to grasp, his life had become a nexus of misery. First, the snack machine down the hall from his office had eaten his last dollar. After pressing F4, he watched with hungry anticipation as the automatic coil spun, slowly pushing the shiny bag of Doritos toward the glass, only to have it stop a millimeter short of the tumbling down into the dispensary. Sterling had shaken that cruel beast with ferocity, trying to get the bag free of its taunting grasp, but the snack machine had remained defiant. And now here he was, trudging with increasing fatigue across a frozen lake in the middle of a winter storm, sometime after midnight, with a knife lodged between his shoulder and his spine. Jim Sterling really wished he'd gotten those Doritos. It was just after 10 p.m. when his cell phone had started playing the Imperial March. Sterling had set that to be his ringtone for his ex-wife Charlotte, so that he'd always know when it was her calling. It filled him with dread to hear that song. Sterling let the phone play for a good while before answering. "Jim, it's Charlotte," she said calmly. Charlotte was always calm. Why shouldn't she be? 15 years ago she got the house and the dog. Sterling got to keep the car and the TV. It was a nice TV, but it had fit better in their living room than in this rinky-dink apartment. "Listen, it's about Thomas," Charlotte informed him. "He's in the drunk tank down in Lakota." Sterling sighed. This was not an uncommon occurrence. The divorce had been rough on Thomas, always little Tommy in his father's eyes. He had grown up to become Big Tommy. Big, drunk Tommy. Big, drunk, loud, brash Tommy. It broke Jim's heart when he thought about it. "You need to go to bail him out," Charlotte told him. Her voice sounded slightly muffled, probably puffing on a cigarette while sitting there in the kitchen of their house. Her house. In curls and a bathrobe, watching a rerun of that reality show she always enjoyed, the one where everybody was always running around half naked and getting into arguments. "I'm at work," Jim replied, "and I got no car." Fair enough. And so, the second miserable moment of the night concluded. Sterling estimated that at least 5 more were waiting for him down in Lakota Police Station. Jim Sterling drove to Lakota, or rather, Jim Sterling started to drive to Lakota, but he never got there. Thinking back on it as he scrambled across the icy with a quick faded stride across an angry wind that licked the dry and caking skin on his face, he came across a bitter conclusion. Jim Sterling was too goddamn nice. "I'm going to die," he thought, "here in the middle of this frozen lake. I'm either going to collapse from exposure or bleed out thanks to this knife I get picked apart by coyotes. I should be in Lakota. Actually, I should be at the office, sipping on a steaming cup of coffee and licking Dorito dust off my fingers. No, screw that. I should be at home watching whatever the hell is on the Cinemax right now, and that glorious goddamn TV, kicked back in my recliner and draining the last fifth of that vodka I have in the pantry." But he wasn't, because he was too goddamn nice. He had taken North Henderson's late shift on the phone because Norm had begged him, offering up the excuse that he wanted to drive his girlfriends with the weird Swedish name down to Sioux Falls to see a Led Zeppelin tribute band. Of course, that wasn't true. Norm was actually going to his other girlfriends, with the weird Thai name, but he didn't want the people around the office to know he had a second piece. Sterling knew Norm's secret because he was observant. At least, he prided himself on being so. But it would seem that the knife and the lake and his imminent demise, then maybe Sterling wasn't quite as observant as he thought he was. Take, for example, his footsteps. Sterling could hear each heavy crunch as his boots packed down the snow covering the icy lake. But as he trudged with the desperation towards nowhere in particular, he realized he could hear another set of heavy footfalls following close behind, with a confident stride. Jim Sterling was being hunted. What had he done to deserve this? Stop to help another human being in need? What possible sin had Sterling committed in the eyes of his pursuer? When you're driving down an empty road in the middle of a cold, dark, winter night, and you spot a vehicle pulled over with its hazard lights on, and a person hunched over one of its tires, isn't it good form to to pull over and offer some assistance? Isn't it the North Dakotan way? Even if the person working the lug nuts looked to be approximately 300 pounds of hulking muscle, any good Samaritan would at least see if they needed roadside assistance. That's exactly what Sterling had done when he saw the rusty, old pickup truck pulled over by his snow embarkments, hitched up on a jack with a giant of a man on heavy brown coat beside it. He pulled up beside the seemingly broken-down vehicle, hesitating for only a brief moment to think about little Tommy down in the drunk tank and just how much of a delay it would put on him to help his individual. Sterling had felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle his collar when the man turned to look into the headlights. Something about the way he didn't blink or shield his eyes from the fluorescent beams, just stared expressionless straight at him, as if measuring Sterling up. He leaned out the window. "I have a phone if you want me to call AAA." Without a word, the man lumbered towards Sterling's car, looking like a cross between a lumberjack and a grizzly bear. He seemed to almost be growing larger in stature with each step. Back in the deepest, darkest recesses of Sterling's brain, in the center for fights, or flights, where his instinct for survival lived, a small voice cried out, "Get out of there!" He hadn't heard that voice since the day he made his vows to Charlotte at the little chapel in Las Vegas. Before he had a chance to react to it, the giant was at his door. The man had to hunch down to look inside the car, and in doing so, he filled the entire space of the window. His massive form seemed to be spilling into the car. A great bushy beard first. Sterling slouched down in his seat, and stuttered but unable to find the right words. His phone. His phone was in the cup holder. He just needed to hand it to the man, that's all. The man was just there for the phone. After all, Sterling had offered it. Okay, so maybe the guy looked like that shaggy giant from Harry Potter. Sterling turned away just long enough to find the phone, but within seconds of turning back he felt the white, hot pain of something sharp sliding into the meat between his shoulder blades. It happened so suddenly that he could barely comprehend why he heard it all. His first thought was that he had just been stabbed, but something in the way he shifted had thrown his back out. "Ah, damn!" Sterling shouted, jerking away, fumbling further toward the passenger side of the car. Something sticking out of his back caught on the edge of the seat and sent more spasms of torture down his spine. He turned to look back at the man, and just saw one beefy hand drawing back through the window. Jesus Christ, did he... Oh no, he did! He stabbed me! That giant gorilla just came over here and stabbed me through my window. Apparently, the man with the dead, expressionless eyes and hands so large they looked like they could palm Sterling's hand and crush it like a cantaloupe wasn't satisfied with just stabbing the stranger. He meant to go all the way. 150% grade. A homicide was etched on his face. He'd either get his stabbing instrument back from Sterling and use it again, or maybe just squeeze his neck until all the veins in his head burst like fireworks. So Sterling had to run. He was not in tangled retreat, more like a trout trying to shimmy its way out the cooler and back into the river. His right arm felt totally useless, and unfortunately, that was his favored one. He barely managed to unbuckle himself with the left and ended up flopping his way across the passenger side of the door, got it open, and tumbled out like a marionette. His assailant was not in a rush. If anything, he let Sterling go. Of course he did, Sterling thought. Where are you going to run to? There's nothing around for miles. But there was a lake. Devil's Lake, it was called. An apt name for the moment, as Sterling began to question if maybe he just met the serpent himself. Across the lake, what looked like the lights of houses glowed in an almost welcoming fashion. If he could cross the ice, get to the homes, maybe someone could help. If only Sterling hadn't left his cell phone behind in the cup holder. That was 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes of grueling agony burning in his back, his right arm hanging limply by his side, his legs feeling like jelly, and the vicious night wind ripping at his flesh. How far had he walked now? The lights of the houses seemed no closer than they had been when he started. Was he imagining them? Sterling took a breath and looked back over his shoulder, feeling his muscles scream against the pain. The man was right there, just 9 or 10 strides away, a monstrous silhouette moving with unnatural swiftness against the brutal winds, staring straight at Sterling. He was going to overtake him in seconds. Jim Sterling was 6'1", and this brute must now be 7 feet tall or more. He just couldn't make out the man's face, just a wild frenzy of hair concealing his features. His limbs had grown thick too. Sterling was sure of it. He now bore massive arms that stained against the brown coats. Even over the sound of the raging wind, Sterling could hear the screams of the man's clothing ripping as his body underwent some terrible metamorphosis right before his eyes.